Thanks, Chair. The ABS publication, Completing the Picture, Environmental Accounting in Practice, I just draw from table 4.8, the value of resource rents from subsoil assets is given as $44 billion in 2009-10, which is very large relative to the revenue that was eventually raised by the MRRT. Do you depreciate the market value of the mines themselves when calculating resources rent as occurs with the tax?
I might just pass this question to Mr. Bruce.
Thanks.
Hockman, or...
Yep. Okay. We take into account all changes to the value. So essentially, it's the depletion of the value of those resources is certainly taken into account in that calculation, but at the same time, it's also a net figure in which we also add the value of newly discovered or newly exploitable subsoil assets as well. But
how do you figure in the depreciation of the mining facilities themselves? Because that's obviously calculated when the tax receipts.
So you're actually talking about the consumption of the fixed capital above the ground or whatever, which is counted in our the investment data, and we actually make the allowance. I suppose the economic term for that is the consumption of fixed capital, which conceptually is very similar to depreciation.
All right.
But it's
I guess what I'm trying to get at is the MRRT legislation allows companies to depreciate assets in a certain way, which has been a bit controversial. How close is the way that legislation handles asset depreciation to the way that ABS calculates it for the purpose of assessing the value of resource rents?
Okay, not especially close, because what we're actually measuring is we're actually trying to measure economic value and economic profit, and that we do that effectively independent of the tax legislation, based on a perpetual inventory model around the expected life of the assets and those calculations. And there isn't necessarily a direct alignment between the expected life or the rates of depreciation applied for tax purposes and the actual rates of consumption of that physical capital, which is what we're trying to measure in the economic accounts.
That's what I thought. I realise it's a fairly technical area to just be doing off the cuff. Could you maybe provide on notice for us some kind of note just outlining in a little bit more detail how you do it and how it departs from the methodology that's used in the MRRT bills?
Yes, we'll certainly look to do that, and we'll probably have to study up on how it's calculated in the MRRT and consult with our colleagues in Treasury.
Okay, very much appreciated, thank you. So in towards the Australian Environmental Economics Accounts, figure 7.5 shows expected resource life of selected minerals based on current rates of extraction. Now these are obviously quite critical figures. So has the ABS or has BRE perhaps done any calculations of how many fewer years the resources will last, given the recent huge investments in new mines? Because you're aware, of course, that nobody in the mining industry or the oil and gas industry intends to pursue anything like the current rates of extraction. Everybody is pursuing very rapid growth.
No, we don't specifically do that, and the complication is one of the things I referred to earlier, is that as the technology changes, then estimates of the actual exploitable reserves tend to also change, and we incorporate those in our measures. And it may well be possible, Senator, to do some decomposition of that for any given period, but it's a well-known phenomenon that if you estimated 20 years ago what the exploitable life of certain resources were, and then looked at the estimate today, in a lot of those cases we've gone well beyond the expected expiry or expected consumption of those resources.
Yeah. But there's two things at play, right? As you've got a facility up and running, you're proving up satellite resources and so on. That expands your resource inventory, but you're also doubling every 20 years or 25 years your output, which halves your resource life.
So you're able to find new resources, yes. Or if you don't change the technology.
Or if you go broke and close up. So how's the ABS, when you're doing these kind of calculations on resource life of selected minerals, or maybe you've just told me that you don't, how do you account for expanded production, which is the goal of every single player in the resource industry in this country?
We don't directly account for the future expanded production, because we're not counting it until that is actually occurring. So we're not really in the business of forecasting those things.
I realise it's tough and it's not what you're asked to do, but I would put to you that actually is giving policymakers a really skewed idea of how long we have, because you're not accounting for an industry that is undergoing perpetual growth.
And I think one of the reasons why we don't do that type of forecasting is that the experience has been that the assumptions you make about the rates of extraction, etc., actually end up driving the results that you get. And often the simplest assumption is to therefore project forward on the basis of just what the recent past is.
So ABS, the SBT 74 also remarked that depletion in the system of environmental experimental accounts does not address the declining quality of ecosystems. Now, the United Nations is developing experimental ecosystem accounts, and I understand that the ABS is a quite important part of that work.
Yes.
Can you tell us when that's likely to reach fruition, and are efficiency dividends that are being imposed on the ABS and most other agencies impairing your ability to deliver that work?
Well, we certainly weigh up that work in terms of efficiency dividends, etc. We must prioritise our work in that. We remain active, very active participants within the system of environmental economic accounts formation. The SEER itself, that was adopted as a standard in February 2012. The next volume of that is actually dealing with the vexed question of the valuation of environmental services, and there is, it's fair to say at this stage, no agreement again on the way in which you do those valuations so that in order to bring them into an accounting framework, particularly for those environmental assets or environmental services in which there are no markets to anchor those valuations. You're back in the world of the assumptions tending to drive the results. But there's a lot of work being done on that, and the ABS, it is a priority for the ABS. We continue to chair the UN's SEER group, and we remain active on the editorial board and their deliberations.
So, but has the efficiency drive impaired that work, or is it you proceeding as you were?
It's proceeding as we have been. We are attending all of the relevant meetings and participating in all of the virtual discussion groups that that move around that work.
All right, thank you. Chair, with your indulgence, can I see the last 60